You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin.
I could feel the eyes on me even before Bianca opened her mouth. The rehearsal dinner was all polished smiles and soft jazz playing in the background, everyone in their fine clothes. But I was already tuned out, trying to ignore the low hum of conversation that felt like it was going on just over my shoulder. Tessa, my wife, was at my side, looking radiant as usual. I was fine. At least I thought I was. Then Bianca, always so smooth, so polished, like she had a degree in playing people, decided to make her move. She raised her wine glass, glanced around the table, and like she was doing us all a favor, she delivered the punchline with a sharp, brittle laugh. "So, Marcus," she said, making sure her voice carried, "how's the life of the unemployed loser going? Still riding your wife's coattails?" The room fell so quiet you could hear the clink of glass on the table. My heart didn't skip a beat. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just let the words hit me, let them sit there in the air like poison. The worst part was how true it sounded to everyone else in the room. All I could see were the raised eyebrows, the small smirks from the guests I didn't know, the awkward coughs and throat clears from the family. They were all watching me, waiting for me to explode or get defensive. But I didn't. I stayed calm. I stayed still. Bianca's eyes gleamed, satisfied with herself. She knew most people at the table didn't know me. They didn't know my history. To them, I was just the husband of the beautiful, successful Tessa Hale. She probably thought she could kick me around because, in her mind, I was powerless. But something in me snapped. Not outwardly. Inside, though, a switch flipped. I wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to cause a scene. No, I would do it differently. I made a mental note. Bianca, arrogant, calculating, and ignorant of the bigger picture. I'd expose her without even raising my voice. I didn't sleep much that night. After the dinner, after Bianca's little stunt, I went straight to my study, the room Tessa always jokingly called my man cave. It's not much. Just dark wood, leather chairs, shelves lined with books I've collected over the years, and a desk that's always been as organized as I could keep it. I didn't need much. Just this. This place where everything had its place, and I could think without the world demanding anything from me. I sat down and pulled out my notebook. Tessa bought it for me years ago. The thick leather cover cracked from use. It had pages that felt like they belonged to something important, like a ledger or a diary you don't show anyone. I opened it to a fresh page, then quickly scribbled down everything I remembered from the dinner. Bianca's words, the timing, who was there. I didn't even have to think about it. I could recall every detail. The way her smile faltered when she saw I wasn't reacting. The way she shifted, trying to cover up. The way I was supposed to be the loser. But in reality, I was the one sitting on something nobody knew about. The truth was, I wasn't just Tessa's husband. I wasn't some passive guy living off her. I was something Bianca, hell, most of the family would never guess. A founding backer of Luminate Ventures. The same Luminate Ventures where Bianca had worked for years. I'd gotten in on the ground floor, taking risks that most people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And I'd done it through a shell company, keeping my name out of it. Not even Tessa knew the full scope of it. I wasn't sure why I kept it all quiet, maybe because I didn't want people seeing me differently. Like I was playing a game just to show off. Or maybe I just liked it that way. Either way, Bianca's little jab at me was nothing compared to the power I held. But there was something satisfying about her not knowing any of that. I closed my notebook, taking a moment to breathe in the quiet. I didn't need to confront her right away. Not yet. The wedding was tomorrow, and I knew some of the Luminate execs would be there. Guests who didn't know me as well as they thought they did. I didn't need to shout or make a scene. No, I'd let the truth come out naturally at the right moment. Let it land like a bomb, but without any noise. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the walls for a while, letting the quiet settle in. The weight of it was something I'd carried for years. This mix of silence and power, and I wasn't going to let Bianca's little remark throw me off. It wasn't about revenge. It was about timing. That's when I heard Tessa's footsteps coming down the hall. Soft, familiar. She opened the door without knocking. She knew I'd be here, and slipped inside. You good? She asked, leaning against the doorframe, her voice low, but there was that softness, that knowing look in her eyes. She knew something was up. She always did. Yeah, I said, not looking at her. Just thinking. She raised an eyebrow. About. I smiled, just a little. About how sometimes people forget that truth has a funny way of making itself known. She didn't press me. She never did. Instead, she just stepped into the room and sat on the edge of my desk, her presence grounding me. You're not planning anything. Crazy, right? I laughed softly, shaking my head. Not crazy. Just necessary. She studied me for a moment, then nodded, like she understood without needing to hear more. All right, just be careful. We don't need any more mess than we're already dealing with. I will, I said, meeting her eyes now. It's not about creating a mess. It's about letting people see the truth. Tessa didn't need me to elaborate. She knew exactly what I meant. She reached over, squeezed my hand, then kissed my cheek softly. I'm with you, she said, then stood up. But remember, Bianca is still family. I nodded, and as she left the room, I turned back to my notebook. A few words stood out. Let there be light. It was all coming together. Just needed to wait for the right moment. The next morning, I found myself in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds. There was something oddly satisfying about the work, about getting my hands dirty and watching the mess of yesterday fade into the quiet hum of nature. The air was cool, the sun still low, and I could hear the soft rustling of leaves, the faint chirp of a bird. It wasn't much, but in moments like this, it felt like everything was in its place. Tessa came out a little while later, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the fence, watching me. Her face was relaxed, but I knew her well enough to recognize the tension beneath her calm. So, she said after a minute, her voice light but probing, you gonna tell me what's going on? I didn't look up. I kept pulling weeds, focusing on the rhythm of it, trying to keep my thoughts as clean and tidy as the garden was slowly becoming. Not seeking revenge, I said, my voice low but steady. Just clarity, just the truth. Tessa let out a soft sigh. She set her coffee down on the stone ledge near the garden, then folded her arms, her eyes fixed on me. You know that's not how this is going to play out, right? You're not some quiet, passive guy to her anymore. She's gonna feel it. I stopped pulling weeds and straightened up. I know. I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned to face her. But it's not about her feeling it. It's about her finally seeing it. Tessa studied me for a moment, then nodded, like she understood the weight of it. She stepped closer, kneeling down beside me to tug at the weeds herself, though we both knew she wasn't really into gardening. It was her way of letting me know she was with me in this, even if she didn't have all the answers. You know, she said, her voice soft but firm, I'm ashamed of her, Marcus. She's my sister, but what she did last night, it wasn't just rude. It was cruel. I sighed, feeling the heaviness of the words settle between us. She doesn't see it that way. She thinks she's untouchable. Tessa nodded again, her hands still in the dirt. She does. And that's the problem, isn't it? She thinks she can get away with anything because she's got the right friends, the right connections. Exactly. I ran a hand through my hair. She used me last night, tried to make me the joke so she could look better. But the truth is, she's the one who's been living a lie. She needs to understand what happens when you treat people like that. I looked down at the garden, at the flowers starting to take shape. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Life, like a garden, needed to be pruned sometimes. Things had to be cleared away, or they'd choke the life out of the rest. Tessa leaned back, looking up at the sky. I don't want this to turn into a humiliation, Marcus. She needs a wake-up call, not a public shaming. I nodded slowly. I'm not trying to make her feel small. I'm just trying to show her the world doesn't revolve around her. And when she steps on the wrong people, it has consequences. She watched me for a moment, her expression softening. I know. I trust you. But you've got to promise me something. I raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight of whatever was coming next. "Promise me you won't take it too far," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm on your side, but she's still family. You're not just putting her in her place. You're putting us all in a position we can't come back from if it goes wrong." I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had someone who truly understood the balance I was trying to strike. Family, power, truth. It wasn't easy to juggle all three. "I'll be fair," I said, and the words felt right. "I won't humiliate her, but I will make sure she understands that no one is untouchable." Tessa smiled then, just the slightest curve of her lips. "I knew you would. Just don't forget she's still my sister." "I won't," I said, turning back to the garden, the weight of her words grounding me. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for something much more important than that. Something that would make everyone, Bianca, the family, and even me, see things clearly without the masks we all hid behind. And when it came time to do what needed to be done, I'd be ready. Because the truth always rises. And when it does, no one stays untouched. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. No more waiting, no more wondering. It was time to put everything into motion. I'd never been one for dramatic gestures. But today I was going to dress for battle. I made my way to the tailor's shop, the air already thick with humidity, the kind of heat that clings to you even in the early hours. The tailor, Giuseppe, had been in the business for decades. A quiet, no-nonsense guy who knew exactly what I needed without having to ask a single question. When I walked in, he barely looked up from the table where he was working on another suit. He just nodded toward the back, like he knew what was coming. I changed in the fitting room, the fabric of the suit soft and heavy, the kind of material that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I didn't need flashy, just sharp. I needed something that said, "I belong here," without screaming for attention. Giuseppe adjusted the jacket one last time, tugging at the sleeves, making sure the cut fit perfectly. When I stepped in front of the mirror, I didn't see some guy getting ready for a wedding. I saw someone preparing for what was coming next. I wasn't dressing up. I was armoring up. "Good," Giuseppe said, giving a final look at the fit. "No need to make a scene, just make sure they see you." I nodded, paying him without a word. The suit was more than just clothes. It was a reminder of everything I had built, and everything I could take down if I wanted to. Next, I went to the bank. The process was quick but precise. A certified check, $35,000, made out to Bianca and her fiancé, Jordan. It wasn't a bribe or a token of goodwill. It was a statement. Family doesn't abandon family, even when they don't deserve it. The check would be the gift they never expected, the one that would hang in the air and make them squirm. "Do you want it in a card or an envelope?" the teller asked, all smiles, as if she had no idea what I was really doing. "Envelope," I said. "No need for extras." The certified check was plain, professional. No embellishments, no extra fluff. Just the kind of thing you'd give someone you were about to do business with, not someone you were trying to impress. I wasn't here to play nice. I was here to make sure Bianca understood just how small her world could become if she kept pushing the wrong buttons. I had a black car service lined up next, nothing too flashy. A simple black sedan. Low-key, understated, just like everything I was planning. People would notice, but they wouldn't know why. It was about timing, about making the right impression at the exact right moment. Back home, I went to my study, sat down at my desk, and flipped open my notebook. There was only one page left, one space for a final thought, a final decision. "Let there be light." I wrote it out slowly, the pen scratching against the paper in the stillness of the room. It wasn't just a line. It was a promise to myself that, when the time came, I wasn't going to just shine a light on Bianca. I was going to expose everything she'd hidden, everything she'd taken for granted. The truth would be like sunlight, bright, unavoidable, and revealing. I set the pen down and leaned back in the chair, the weight of everything I was about to do settling into my bones. There was no turning back now. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. It was about balance. And it was about time that Bianca learned a lesson she'd never forget. The suit, the check, the car, it was all part of the plan. A plan that would unfold, slowly and deliberately. And when it was done, people would see Bianca for who she really was, not the woman she thought she could be, but the one she was meant to be after all this. The wedding venue was as opulent as I expected. Massive, with marble floors that reflected every chandelier above. The whole place felt like something out of a dream. I had to admit, Bianca had pulled off something impressive. There was no question about it. The flowers, the tables, the shimmering linens, everything was perfect. Tessa and I walked in quietly, both of us sharp in our new clothes, but calm, composed. We moved through the crowd like we belonged, nodding to a few familiar faces, but not lingering. The hum of conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet filled the air. People were still arriving, a sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. I could feel the weight of the room shift slightly as we entered, but no one said anything. No one really needed to. They knew who I was, or at least who they thought I was. Just the husband. Just the guy who'd been lucky enough to marry up. Tessa's hand brushed against mine as we found our seats. I could feel her nervous energy, but she didn't say anything. We were both quiet, both waiting for the moment. The ceremony started on time, which felt a little too perfect, but I didn't let it distract me. Bianca entered, looking every bit the picture of a modern-day princess. The dress was sleek, elegant. No frills, just lines that flowed perfectly with every step she took. She was stunning, and I'll give her credit for that. In that moment, I didn't want to ruin her day. Not now. Not yet. As she walked down the aisle, I caught Tessa's eye. She was smiling, proud, but I could see the tension beneath it. The same tension I felt. We weren't here to tear Bianca down today. Not in front of everyone. That would come later. I focused on Bianca as she stood at the altar, her eyes on Jordan, her fiancé. They exchanged vows with all the practiced sincerity of a couple who had rehearsed it 1,000 times. It wasn't the kind of love that I would have chosen for myself, but that didn't matter. I wasn't here to judge their relationship. I was here to watch the performance, to see how the day unfolded. I took note of the key Luminate executives in the crowd. Several of them were seated near the front, whispering among themselves, looking every bit as polished as their company's brand. I didn't miss the way they looked at Bianca with admiration. How she smiled back, showing off her network with the kind of practiced ease that made me clench my jaw just a little. She was playing her part well. As the ceremony wrapped up, Bianca and Jordan turned to walk back down the aisle, their faces glowing with excitement. They looked like they had everything figured out. I stayed seated, watching Bianca work the crowd during the reception. She was already making the rounds, charming people, talking business, dropping names. It was a performance, one I had seen her put on 100 times before. But today, the act felt different. There was a nervous energy to it that wasn't there in the past. She was always looking over her shoulder, making sure she was seen, making sure she was impressing the right people. I kept to the edges of the crowd, observing, waiting. I wasn't here to make a scene. That would come later when the time was right. My silence was deliberate, a strategy. It was all part of the plan. I could feel the tension building, but I wasn't ready to let it explode yet. Today wasn't about confrontation. It was about watching, letting Bianca think she was still in control, letting her enjoy the limelight, let her believe that everything was just as she wanted it. The storm would come when she least expected it. But for now, I was content to stay quiet and let her keep playing her game. The cocktail hour was buzzing with the kind of chatter you'd expect from a room full of people trying to impress each other. The clink of glasses, the laughter, the light hum of conversation. Everyone was in their element, playing their part. I was standing by the bar, nursing a drink I hadn't even taken a sip of yet, keeping my distance. I was still watching Bianca as she worked the crowd like a pro. Her polished smile never wavered, her eyes scanning for anyone who might be of use. She didn't see me, not yet. Then, just as I was starting to feel the weight of waiting, I heard her voice. It was loud enough to cut through the noise, sharp and pointed, like a knife in a silk cloth. "Oh, and here's Marcus, my brother-in-law," she said, turning to a group of Luminate execs who had gathered near the edge of the room. She looked at me with that thin smile, like she was about to make some grand joke at my expense. He's the unemployed loser of the family. Isn't that right, Marcus? The room went still for a second. Everyone's eyes turned to me. There it was again, that same jab she'd thrown at me the night before. The same attempt to put me in a box where she could laugh and everyone would follow along. But this time it was different. This time, she had no idea who she was talking to. Before I could react, I saw Adrian, CEO of Luminate, approach. He had been standing just behind the group Bianca had gathered, watching. I didn't expect him to say anything, but he did. His gaze shifted from Bianca to me, recognition flickering across his face. "Marcus?" he asked, a slow smile spreading across his features as he stepped forward. "Marcus Hale." Bianca blinked, clearly thrown off by the warmth in Adrian's voice. "Yeah," she said, her smile faltering just a bit. "Marcus, he's Tessa's husband." Adrian's smile only widened. "Marcus Hale, the same Marcus Hale who was a founding investor in Luminate Ventures?" The room went dead silent. People froze, and I could practically hear the collective gasp as the realization hit them all. Bianca's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Adrian turned to the crowd of executives who had been standing with him, his expression shifting from surprise to something much more serious. "Well, for those of you who don't know," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "Marcus here was one of the earliest backers of Luminate, the guy who believed in us before anyone else did. He took the biggest risk when we were just a startup. He was there when we were building the foundation. Marcus, along with his team, helped keep us afloat in those early days when no one else would." The room was still. People exchanged glances, trying to piece together what had just happened. But no one, not even Bianca, seemed to know how to react. Adrian didn't hesitate. His voice hardened, his tone sharp now. "And it's come to my attention that some of our employees seem to have forgotten where they came from. Bianca, I'm talking to you. Your behavior tonight, your comment toward Marcus, is unacceptable. It's cruel and short-sighted. We don't tolerate that kind of attitude at Luminate." The room was quiet, and it wasn't the kind of silence you could cut with a knife. It was thick and suffocating. Bianca, her mouth still hanging open, looked like she might be sick. Adrian didn't stop. "Effective immediately, you're being let go. I'm sure you understand that we have a standard for how we treat people here, and that includes our investors. Your lack of judgment is astounding." Bianca opened her mouth to protest, but the words died before she could speak them. A few murmurs of agreement came from the executives, and I saw several of them nodding, exchanging quiet words with HR representatives who had been standing off to the side. The HR manager stepped forward, confirming what Adrian had said. "We will follow up with your exit paperwork, Bianca. I'm sorry, but this decision is final." I stayed silent the whole time. I didn't need to say a word. There was no gloating, no need for it. The truth had already been laid bare for everyone to see, and Bianca's reputation, everything she had built, was crumbling in front of her eyes. She stood there, frozen, a mix of confusion and humiliation flashing across her face. The people she had spent the whole night trying to impress were now backing away, their smiles slipping as they looked at her with pity, not admiration. I didn't want to revel in her downfall. I didn't want to be the cause of it. But I couldn't help but feel a small, quiet satisfaction. She had underestimated me, and now she was seeing the price of it. I glanced at Tessa across the room, watching her carefully. She hadn't flinched when Adrian made the announcement. She was calm, composed, the way I knew she would be. We weren't here for vengeance. We were here for clarity. And that was exactly what we had gotten. The silence in the room stretched on, suffocating, as Bianca stood there, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. The shock of Adrian's decision had knocked the wind out of her, and I could almost feel the weight of her humiliation settle into her bones. The crowd had dispersed a little, but they weren't gone. No one was gone. They were all waiting for the next move, the fallout. I stood there for a moment, watching her crumble, feeling the eyes of the room on me. I knew what they expected. The show wasn't over yet. I could almost hear their unspoken thoughts. What's he going to do next? Is he going to gloat? Is he going to finish her off? But I wasn't here for that. I didn't need to drag it out. I stepped forward, keeping my movements slow, deliberate. My hand slid into my jacket pocket, pulling out the envelope with the certified check. I didn't speak at first. I just walked to Bianca, and when I was close enough, I extended it to her. Her eyes flickered to the envelope, then back to my face, confusion still clouding her expression. Tessa and I began, my voice low but steady. We wanted to give you a wedding gift. She blinked, and I could see the tightness in her throat, the struggle to hold herself together. She reached for the envelope slowly, like she didn't quite understand what was happening, like her mind was still stuck somewhere between the shock of losing her job and the confusion of this strange act of generosity. Marcus, I don't, she started, her voice shaking, but I cut her off gently. It's not a reward, I said, my eyes never leaving hers. It's a clean start. Her gaze dropped to the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling as she opened it, pulling out the check. When she saw the amount, her breath hitched. She looked up at me wide-eyed. This is $35,000, she whispered, her voice cracking. Why would you? Because family doesn't abandon family, I said, my voice hardening slightly. Even when family does things that deserve consequences. She flinched at the words, like they stung, and I could see the guilt building in her face, her mind trying to process everything. The room was still, every eye on us, but I wasn't worried about their judgment anymore. I wasn't concerned with what anyone else thought. I watched her carefully, letting the weight of what I said sink in. The job loss is your consequence. Your behavior caught up with you, but I'm not here to make sure you fail. I'm giving you a chance to do better. Luminate is offering you a path back. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening, but she didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the check in her hand, the words finally sinking into her. The path's not easy, I continued. 6 months of volunteer work. No social media, empathy training, full reset. You'll have to earn back what you lost, but that's on you. If you can't do it, that's on you too. I'm not giving you a handout. This is a chance. A way to fix things if you're willing to work for it. Her chest rose and fell with a shaky breath. She looked at the check again, then at me, and I saw the storm of emotions cross her face. Shame, disbelief, guilt, and something else, something I hadn't seen in her before, vulnerability. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. After everything I've said, after everything I've done, why would you still? Because I'm not here to punish you, Bianca, I said, the words coming out with a weight that I could feel in my chest. I'm here to make sure you learn. This, I motioned to the check in her hand. This is your shot. You can't go back and undo what you did, but you can start fresh. But you have to take it seriously. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if embarrassed, but I could see it now. She was overwhelmed, not just by the amount of money, but by the reality that she had reached a breaking point. This was her moment to decide who she wanted to be going forward. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she nodded. I'll do it. I'll take the offer. Her voice cracked on the last word, but it was firm enough, and I knew she meant it. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I had given her the opportunity to change, to step up, and now it was in her hands. The room around us remained still. No one spoke, but I could feel their eyes on Bianca. The whispers would come later, and she would have to face the aftermath of tonight. But for now, she had a chance to rebuild, and I wasn't going to take that from her. It was up to her to earn back what she had lost. Bianca stood there for a moment, the check still in her hand, her face a mask of mixed emotions. Guilt, confusion, and something else. Something like relief, maybe even hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She took a shaky breath, and for the first time that night, I saw her look at me. Not as the enemy, but as someone who had given her a chance to make things right. I'll make it right, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. And in that moment, I believed her. A few weeks had passed since that night, and I'd been watching the changes in Bianca, though I tried not to make it obvious. She had started fulfilling her volunteer and coaching requirements, working with displaced workers at a local nonprofit, offering advice, leading job readiness classes. I wasn't sure how much of it was out of genuine desire to make amends or just a step to rebuild her image. It didn't really matter, not yet. She had made a choice, and that was the first step. One morning, I was sitting in the living room, the sunlight coming through the windows just the way I liked it, when Tessa's phone rang. She picked it up, glancing at the screen before answering. "It's Bianca," Tessa said, her voice quiet. I could tell by the way she said it that it wasn't a casual call. Tessa's expression softened as she listened. Then she nodded, her eyes meeting mine across the room. "She's apologizing. Sincerely." She said she knows now she was wrong. It's a different tone. "I think it's real." I leaned back, rubbing the back of my neck, unsure of how I felt about this. Bianca's apology had always felt like something just out of reach, something I wasn't ready to accept. But now I wasn't so sure. Tessa put the phone on speaker, and I could hear Bianca's voice crackling through the line, softer than I'd ever heard it. Marcus," she started, then paused, as if collecting herself. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what happened and what I said, what I did. I was selfish. I didn't respect you or anyone, and I see that now. I've spent the last few weeks working with people who have had their lives turned upside down, and I get it now. I really get it." I could feel the sincerity in her words, but it was still hard to know how to respond. Tessa looked over at me again, a gentle smile on her face. "She's not the same person, Marcus. I think you can hear that." I didn't say anything right away. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe it. It was just that trust had to be earned. And Bianca had a long road ahead of her. But her apology was different this time. She wasn't trying to spin things. She wasn't trying to cover up. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Bianca continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I hope I can prove that I'm changing. I know it's going to take time, but I'm working on it. I'm sorry for everything." I exhaled slowly. This wasn't an easy apology to accept, but I could hear the difference in her voice. I could feel the weight of her words, and I knew this wasn't just a surface-level gesture. This was something deeper. "I'll meet with her," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "But it has to be just a conversation. No pitch, no ploys. If she's serious, she knows what this is about." Tessa nodded, as if she had already known I'd say that. "I'll set it up." A few days later, Bianca called me directly. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of nervousness beneath it, the kind you get when you know you've messed up and you're trying to fix it without making it worse. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "I know I've done a lot of damage and I can't undo it, but I'm hoping that, if you're willing, I could meet you for coffee. I don't want anything from you. I just want to apologize again. I need to say it to you face to face." Her words hit harder than I expected. She wasn't asking for favors or pretending to be something she wasn't anymore. She was acknowledging that everything had changed. "Okay," I said after a pause, thinking it through. "Let's meet. I'll be there." I hung up the phone and looked at Tessa, who was watching me, waiting. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, though a small part of me wondered what would come of it. She's trying. That's all I can ask for right now. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe. A small, no-frills place where the coffee was strong and the atmosphere was calm. Bianca was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. She looked different. No polished smiles, no airs of superiority. She was just there, like she was waiting for something, but not expecting anything. I sat down across from her and she didn't waste time. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes met mine with something that looked like genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said again, her voice soft, "for everything. I've learned a lot these past few weeks, but I'm not asking you to trust me again right away. I just wanted you to know I'm not the same person I was, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn that back." I studied her for a long moment, letting the silence settle between us. And then, finally, I nodded. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, my voice steady. "It'll take time, but it sounds like you're on the right path." She exhaled, relief flooding her face. "I won't let you down," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine with an openness that hadn't been there before. Maybe there was hope for her after all. But that wasn't something I could hand over just yet. It had to be earned, and Bianca knew that now. A few days after our coffee meeting, I sat across from Bianca again. This time, we weren't in a crowded cafe. It was just the two of us. But it wasn't as awkward as I thought it would be. We were both just trying to figure out what this was. It wasn't easy, and I could see that she was still uncomfortable in her own skin. But she was trying, and that was something. She took a sip of her coffee and set the cup down, her hands clasped together on the table. "I've been working with this group, people who've lost their jobs. Mostly older workers, some of them laid off after decades in the steel industry. They don't know what to do, how to get back on their feet." I raised an eyebrow, interested despite myself. "Sounds like tough work." She nodded, her eyes focused on her hands. "It is, but there's one guy, Frank. He's been working at the same plant for over 30 years. Lost his job, and now he doesn't know what's next. I keep thinking about him, and..." She stopped, then met my eyes. "He reminds me of you." I blinked, surprised. "Me? Yeah," she said quietly. "Not just the job thing, but the way he feels like he's lost his identity, like there's nothing left for him. He's frustrated, but he doesn't know how to fix it. You were like that, weren't you? After what happened with Luminate." Her words hit harder than I expected. I looked away for a moment, focusing on the empty space between us, trying to keep my emotions in check. I'd never thought of myself like that, but hearing it from her, it made sense. It stung. I exhaled slowly. I didn't know how to fix it, not for a while, but I did eventually. Bianca nodded, and for the first time I saw her in a different light. She wasn't just the arrogant woman who had tried to tear me down. She was someone who understood something about loss. And that made a difference. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter this time, "for everything I said, for what I did. I know now that you can't just fix things with money or charm. You've got to do the work. Frank is doing the work. I'm trying to do it too." Her words landed differently this time. I could see the weight in them, the sincerity. There was no pretension. She wasn't asking for sympathy, just a chance to keep proving herself. I could respect that. "I can see that," I said, nodding. "But it's not just about proving yourself to others. You've got to prove it to yourself, too." She was quiet for a moment, then let out a small laugh. "Yeah, I'm learning that." The conversation moved on, easy in a way I hadn't expected. We weren't rivals anymore. We weren't family in the way we used to be, but we were two people who had a clearer understanding of each other now. Maybe it was possible, even for someone like Bianca, to change. A week later, I got a call from Adrian. "Marcus," he said, his tone casual, but I could tell something had shifted. "I wanted to give you an update on Bianca. She's completed all the conditions, 6 months of volunteer work, empathy training, no social media, the whole thing. She's applied for a different role at Luminate, a smaller position, less pressure. I think she's earned a shot at it." I leaned back in my chair, processing the news. This was it, the decision point. Bianca had done the work, proven that she could change. But would Luminate let her back in? I thought about everything she had done since that night, the work she'd put in, the way she'd accepted the consequences, and how she'd grown. I wasn't blind to her past, but I could see that she was trying to be different now. "Recommend her," I said after a moment. "Give her the shot. She's changed. It's not just for show." Adrian was quiet for a beat, then he chuckled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that. I agree. We'll bring her back on." I hung up the phone feeling like a weight had lifted, even if just a little. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but it felt like the right thing to do. A few weeks later, Bianca was quietly hired back at Luminate, her new role far removed from the power she once wielded. It wasn't flashy. There were no grand announcements or celebrations. but it was a chance to rebuild. I'd like to say things went back to normal right away. But they didn't. Not completely. Sunday dinners with the family became less tense, though. Bianca wasn't the same woman she'd been. There was still some awkwardness, still some distance, but it was different now. The air between us wasn't as thick with resentment. It was slow, but it was progress. And sometimes that was all you could ask for. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace settling in. Bianca had done the work. She had earned her second chance. Maybe, in the end, that was enough. Months passed, and things had slowly settled into a new rhythm. Sunday dinners weren't as tense anymore. Bianca, though still finding her way, had worked hard to rebuild her reputation. The job at Luminate was small, but it was hers, quietly earned. She wasn't the same person she had been before, and I could see it in the way she carried herself now. That night, as the family gathered around the table, there was a palpable shift in the air. Bianca sat across from me, her posture straight but more relaxed than I had ever seen her. She met my eyes and smiled. A real smile, no edge to it. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of something real. "Not just for the check, but for the hard truth. I needed it. I don't know if I would have figured it out without you." Her words weren't perfect, but they were enough. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was acknowledging what I'd done. The past had been a battleground, but it felt like we were finally in a place where the walls between us were beginning to come down. Tessa, sitting next to me, exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. There was a lightness in her expression now, relief, I think. It had been a long road, but it was clear that Bianca's journey had made a difference in more ways than one. Clive and Margaret, who had once hovered around Bianca like nothing could touch her, seemed quieter these days. They'd backed off, realizing their daughter's ambition had needed some grounding. Maybe they had learned a lesson too. I caught Margaret glancing over at Bianca with a look of something like pride, but also caution. She wasn't the same either, and that felt like progress. As the evening wore on, Adrian and I met for lunch at a small place downtown. There were no cameras, no pretense, just two guys sitting down and talking. "You know," Adrian said, his voice low but thoughtful, "it's funny. We both know people who rise to the top and forget where they came from. It's so easy to get caught up in titles, in status, in all of that." He paused, taking a bite of his sandwich before continuing. "But you and I both know that respect. It's not in the title you hold or the image you project. It's in how you treat the people who can't give you anything in return." I looked at him for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. All this time, I'd stayed quiet, watching Bianca try to climb and step on anyone she thought couldn't touch her. But in the end, it was the quiet work behind the scenes that built everything. "Yeah," I said, my voice more reflective than I had intended. "It's easy to forget that. You get so caught up in who can do something for you that you forget who you might be stepping over." Adrian nodded. "I'm glad you gave her that shot, Marcus. You taught her something she wouldn't have learned otherwise." I leaned back in my chair, watching the traffic outside, and I realized something. This whole ordeal had started out as a war. But it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about clarity, about seeing people for who they really were, not the image they put out there. I stood up to leave, paying for the check, and Adrian walked with me to the door. As we parted ways, I turned to him and said one last thing. "Here's a rule for you, Adrian," I said, the words coming out clear and simple. "Never call someone a loser if you haven't asked who they really are, because sometimes they helped build the empire you're standing in." He smiled, nodding in understanding. I knew he got it. As I walked back to my car, I thought about Bianca and what was to come. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But sometimes people had to fall before they could rise again. And maybe, just maybe, we could all find a little redemption along the way.